Hey there, my name is Scott Groves. I'm a loan officer, coach, author, husband, father, jujitsu practitioner currently, and you can catch me this week on the Jesse T Show.
Scott, welcome to the Jesse T Show, brother.
Welcome. Thank you, man. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, man. Our good friend Laura Di Benedetto put this connection together. And whenever she says connect with someone, I say immediately. So I'm so glad we plugged in, man.
Me too. I'm glad you go by Jesse T because it's like as many times as I read your name, I just still want to mispronounce it. So like Tedisco, that's like the coolest last name ever.
Thanks, brother. It's like everything else in my life in the beautiful way. It's a walking contradiction because it doesn't make sense. It's an Italian last name, but it means German or German-like. So if you were in Italy and you're like, oh, that's a German car, German-like, you're like, Tedesco. Like, doesn't make any sense. I don't know. But yeah, thank you so much for the compliment. And that actually, it's a family nickname that goes way back. It's, everybody in Boston calls us T, but it's also probably easier to say T than it is Tedesco. You're right.
Perfect.
Yeah, brother. Well, tell the world a little bit about you, what you do, and, what got you to this point in your life, dude.
Yeah, so pretty crazy, man. I'm 42 years old as we're recording this in 2021. We've come out of a crazy year in COVID. And I like to see my day job, where we tend to spend 50, 60, 70 hours a week. I do home loans for a living. It's my primary source of income. It's my primary kind of 9 to 5 focus. But because I'm a glutton for punishment, I also run a coaching business for loan officers. So kind of early morning and then Sunday for about 4 to 5 hours on Sunday. I run a coaching business where we train loan officers how to basically lead generate and run their business like a business. That led to me writing a book, shameless plug for Lead Generate, 61 Days to Double Your Pay.
Oh, yeah.
And then when that became a best-selling book on Amazon, which is pretty easy to do because you can game the system on Amazon. But when that happened, you start getting calls for doing keynotes and mentoring and kind of facilitating seminars. So then I spent like $100,000 learning how to properly facilitate seminars and live events and kind of Tony Robbins style and how to bring out the best in people. So, it's kind of been this evolution of like loan officer, coach, speaker, author, do some other stuff, try to go to boxing and jiu-jitsu a couple of days a week to get punched in the head and tapped out by 130-pound women that are like twice as good as I am at jiu-jitsu. So yeah, I do a lot, man. But most importantly, it all kind of revolves around that space of personal finance, mortgage, or being a loan officer.
Oh yeah, brother. Yeah, that's it's very humbling, the sport of martial arts in general, but jiu-jitsu specifically, because size and strength is immediately taken away by those who have great technique. And so you could be a 120-pound woman dominating a 200-plus-pound man.
Totally. There's this 130-pound brown belt. I won't use her name because I think she'd be embarrassed, but she's the LA County sheriff. And she realized like, hey, if I don't want to have to pull out my gun one day and shoot somebody, I need to be able to manhandle like a 220-pound male. So she got into jiu-jitsu. She's a brown belt, teetering on black belt right now. And it's very humbling to have an attractive young lady just throw you around on the mat like you're a rag doll. And you're right, man. The skill, the leverage, kind of using that fulcrum of like where she knows she can get pressure. It's encouraging, but it's also really embarrassing as a dude.
Do you follow Jocko Willink at all?
Yeah, it's funny. I had the opportunity to work with Jocko about 10 years ago when he got his start in the professional arena. He was the sales coach at a company called Prospect Mortgage. He had owned an MMA gym with the CEO of our company. And so I actually got to work with Jocko for about a year. And I'd say we're not friends, we're acquaintances. I wish I could say we were friends. That was a strategic mistake, not becoming better friends with him. But that back then he was just like this meathead out of the Navy SEAL. I don't even think he knew how to spell mortgage. But yeah, big strategic mistake, not becoming better friends with him. But yeah, he's awesome. I listen to his podcast.
He's a big proponent of law enforcement having at least like a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, and Rogan talks about this a lot of times too. And there's actually, I don't know if it's because of those two, Rogan and Jocko, but there's I don't know if it was Minneapolis or somewhere in the Midwest. They're actually going to institute every police officer has to have a blue belt so that they can effectively mitigate a situation without having to use deadly force. Because in jiu-jitsu,
you can manhandle somebody without hurting them.
Yeah, you practice murder for a living and you don't murder. You know what I mean? Like you put people in headlocks and you choke people out, and you get people in these compromised positions where you just basically. And here's the thing: people that don't understand jiu-jitsu, it's extremely if the person knows what they're doing, and they know, they've been trained well, and they know how to get you in a position that's like, it's one of those things where you can put someone in a position where they can't fight back, but you're not going to injure them long term whatsoever, especially if you don't break anything, snap anything. If you just put them in an arm bar where they kind of like have to tap out, or a leg lock, or at the end of the day, it's very, compared to other martial arts and other forms of, aggressive putting people down, it's actually a really like nice way to do things.
Yeah. Yeah. A funny story. We're totally off topic here, but I got beat up by the coach's son. I used to wrestle in high school. I got beat up for 3 years by the coach's son because he was a badass. And then he just started doing jujitsu with us. And I'm only about 6 months or a year ahead of the journey as he is. But just that 6 months or a year is a world of difference. And so at 42, this is kind of my redemption tour from high school, that I get to beat up on my old nemesis from wrestling in high school. It's been great. But to your point, I mean, we can go at it hard every day for an hour because you kind of know where to stop so that you don't injure somebody. And obviously that's a restraint that police officers need to learn, where in the heat of the moment, they can remove themselves from the situation a little bit and calm down, which I'm a pretty hardcore libertarian. So anything that involves less police brutality, I'm a big fan of.
Yeah, man, growing up in Boston, there's a very big culture of like hot-headed, just like it's like the agoge for Spartans. Like we're always fighting, we're always getting into trouble. It's just like really, really intense. And it's interesting because growing up, like I used to get into a lot of fights. And once I picked up martial arts around 2011, I hadn't gotten into another street fight since. Like I just don't do it because there's something about once you're trained and you just, you know what you're capable of. So you don't have to prove anything to anyone. That comes a lot of times from people like, let me show you how tough I am. A lot of times the toughest people are the quietest ones about it, but they can kill you in a second. And then the second thing is, you know how to remove yourself from situations instead of putting yourself into them. So you can kind of walk away from a situation, unless it's a self-defense thing for you or someone you love. I've found personally, I don't know if you found this, but like, there's never going to be a need for me to actually start a fight, but I can finish one.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think it also helps as you get older, your testosterone level goes down a little bit. Because I remember when I was in the Army, like we were always looking to get into a bar fight. And I just look back at that and I'm like, what a fucking moron I was at 20. Oh, shoot. Can we cuss on this thing?
Of course you can. Listen, okay. I'm a reformed Navy sailor from Boston. We're going to swear a little bit on this podcast.
Okay, perfect. I just like, what a fucking idiot I was in my 19, 20, 21. Like, could have got stabbed in the middle of a bar fight just for being a moron. And now I'm just like, all right, cool. You kids go at it. I'm gonna peacefully walk over here and have a beer.
So talk about that a little bit, your trajectory from wrestling. Like, where'd you grow up? You wrestled and then you got into the military and then you kind of got into this career that you're in now. Talk about your journey.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. My parents were really, really hard, working middle-class family from Los Angeles, California. I was born when they were 19 and 20. So really good people, worked their ass off, did the best they could. But I mean, they had kids when they were still kids. They didn't really have a trajectory for us. So I was a pretty smart kid. I guess they just kind of assumed I would figure it out on my own and go to college and whatnot. But then, sophomore, junior, senior year, there wasn't really a plan or a path. Right? I didn't find that high school mentor who's like, all right, Scott, here's where you need to apply and here's how you get scholarships. So senior year kind of came and I was like, oh, I guess I was supposed to be on this track to apply for colleges and scholarships and really didn't have a plan. And lo and behold, I'll never forget Danielle Kumas, who sat next to me alphabetically, was going to take the ASVAB test, which I knew nothing about. I'm like, well, I get to sit next to this pretty girl for 4 hours while we take this like wanna be in the military test. And I took the test, I scored pretty high. So I had this recruiter just coming around nonstop being like, hey, Scott, you could go work on submarines, or we could pay for you to go through the Army as a dentist, or you could go into whatever. I'm like, no, if I'm going to go into the military, I want to be an infantry guy and blow stuff up. And so that's what I did. So I went into the Army straight out of high school. I was in a really crazy time, or really a peaceful time, from 97 to 2000. So Bosnia had kind of come and went. Obviously, September 11th had not happened yet. So I did my 3 years at the time. If you signed up in high school, you only had to do 3 years instead of 4 years. Signed up, actually got out of the military on September 11th, 2000.
Wow.
So missed all the craziness by a year. And, everybody I served with at this point has done 3-4 tours in Iraq, Afghanistan. So it's kind of just getting firsthand knowledge of all that. It's like, in some ways, I kind of feel guilty. Like I trained for this stuff and then I missed out on the game. But in some ways, I'm like, hey, I'm really glad I didn't have to see the stuff that many of my friends have seen and can't unsee. So, got out of the Army, and then like every single person that's in mortgages, nobody grows up saying, I really want to go into mortgages, or I can't wait to be a financial planner and look at stock portfolios all day. Like that shit never happens. accidentally fall into the finance world. So started working at Washington Mutual, rode that bubble all the way up till 2008, 2009, went broke and lived on couches like many other loan officers in 2009. And then it's just been like a cornucopia of blessings since 2009. Like business has been great. The real estate and housing market in California has been on fire for basically a decade.
Yeah.
Just keep doubling income, doubling production, have a great team that we work for a great company called Movement Mortgage. That's very heart centered and all about kind of being a movement of change in kind of company culture. And, for example, our CEO last year, every mortgage company in the world just had the most profitable year they've ever had in the history of the mortgage business. He took his base salary and then gave his $200 million in profit to charity. I mean, just an amazing guy named Casey Crawford. And that's kind of the type of company I work for. So, I don't have it figured all out, but I feel like at 42, I'm in a much better spot than I was at 22.
Big time. And for you to go through the real estate crash crisis bubble of 08, 09 and come back into it. I mean, I actually was in banking before being a financial planner, and I got into banking right around 2011. So we were starting to kind of come out a few years later, starting to kind of get back on track. And, there was so many people that had just been burnt out, or they've been, they lost everything and they couldn't get back to it. So how did you stick it out? Like you said, you were sleeping on couches. Like what were you doing? Like you had the scrappy dog mentality, whatever it took. Did you have like a side hustle? Like what'd you do to get through, and why? Because like you said, most people don't grow up wanting to be a mortgage lender or a financial planner. So what was the push?
So the why is kind of funny. I got out of the Army, started going to junior college. A couple, like 2 years in, I started to feel like I kind of saw 10 years in advance of maybe 20 years in advance of all the craziness that's going on now in the educational institutions, and like the super wokeness and the, every middle class European white male is just the devil. And so I took like class after class where it was just like negativity. And then I was really busy in the mortgage space. So I kind of found an excuse to drop out. And so, when the mortgage crisis hit, I was like, well, I'm not really qualified to do anything else. There's no jobs in the civilian world where you get to blow stuff up. And then there's like, I didn't really know how the skill from the mortgage and banking industry transferred over to any other industry. So I kind of just wrote it out. And, the smart thing that I did was, not surprisingly, based on the book that I wrote, I doubled down on lead generation. It's like, well, if I don't have but 1 or 2 deals a month to work on, I got to spend all my other time lead generating, calling clients, calling referral sources. The stupid thing I did, I probably should have just declared bankruptcy like everybody else in America, because I ended up spending all of my 30s digging out of debt and upside down properties, and effectively $1 million net negative that I had myself in this hole coming out of 2009. Again, probably should have just declared bankruptcy like everybody else. No judgment for anybody who had to do that, but I didn't. I kind of had this pride thing, and I was like, well, how am I going to stay in the mortgage industry if I'm somebody with a foreclosure or a short sale or whatnot? So, partied a lot in my 20s, did a lot of stupid things as I was starting to make decent money, then made no money for 2 years. And I was just like, well, I guess I think I made $18,000 in 2009 or something. But I was just like, I got to hang on. I don't know how to do anything else. Double down on the lead generation. And I'm glad I did. I mean, there's definitely some financial missteps I made. Could have had a financial planner like you in my 20s to advise me. I don't know, maybe don't have your whole 401k in WAMU common stock. Maybe a bad plan, right? Yes. So made a lot of mistakes, but recovered from it nicely. And then I married wisely about 6 years ago to a woman who's very, very frugal and financially prudent. And, she's kind of kept us on the right track.
That's great, man. So were you at this point going over the last few years from like, let's even call it like 08, 09 until now, did you find yourself getting into like coaches, mentoring, personal development? You mentioned the name Tony Robbins earlier in terms of how you've structured some of your stuff, just kind of taking from him. Like, were you learning along the way, trying to grow along with like paying the bills?
Yeah. It's funny. I'll never forget. I had a conversation with a gentleman named Toby Harris, who was the original founder of Movement Mortgage. And he had flown out to LA. He's an East Coast guy. And we sat down. I had just had like my first really good month in a while. Like I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm like, okay, now we're kind of making some big boy money. I got enough disposable income to put towards paying off the debt and like saving a little bit. And so we met. He's like, okay, cool. And who's your coach? I'm like, what do you mean? Who's my coach? Like, I just work harder. he's like, oh, you're a big boxing fan, right? And he's like, yeah. And at the time, this is probably 10 years ago, I had time to watch sports because I didn't have kids. So it's like, I knew who every big boxer's trainer was. I knew who, Manny Pacquiao, Ricky Hatton, Mayweather. I knew who all their trainers and all their coaches were. And so he just shifted the conversation to boxing. I didn't catch on to what he was doing. And he was like, well, who's this guy's trainer? And who's this guy's coach? And who's this? And oh yeah, you guys got the Lakers here. Who's Kobe Bryant's coach or whatever? And so at the end of it, like I finally caught on and I'm like, all right, Kobe, all right, Toby, I get it. And he's like, yeah. He's like, all these great people, everybody has a coach. He's like, go get a coach because you can work harder until you're blue in the face. But unless you have a plan and a coach, you're not going to get any better. So like 9, 10 years ago, I started taking it seriously. I hired my first coach. And then I just really got kind of addicted to this idea of like personal and professional development. And other than the fact that I still doing too many Diet Pepsis and I'm carrying about 10 extra pounds, like I've gotten really focused in those areas of like, self-discipline, self-mastery, business development. I'm rereading this book you might have come across, Traction. I'm reading this with our coaching groups. It's about the entrepreneur operating system. And it's really like, how do small independent people run their business like a business? And so I just went to seminar after seminar, coaching event after coaching event. And eventually fell in with this great group of people kind of centered around my friend Hal Elrod, who wrote The Miracle Morning. And like, he's just got friends and mentors who coached with and for Tony Robbins and people that know the whole NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And so like just being immersed with that group of people, you can't help but get better. And I've taken it really serious over the last 10 years. I fall off the wagon sometimes and get a little undisciplined, watch too much Netflix, play on social media too much and argue about politics. But for the most part, I think the last 10 years have been great as far as helping us get dialed in on like what we do as a coaching program. And then, I still pay, I think I pay between the jiu-jitsu coach, my business coach, and a personal coach. I'm still paying like 20 grand a year for coaching, and it's worth every penny.
Best investment you'll ever make is in yourself so that you can pour into other people. No question. And things that you like to do. I mean, hell, it's fun doing jujitsu. It's fun doing martial arts. And it's great if you can have somebody, like I was lucky enough because I went through a few years of training different gyms and having, just trainers that I would go to for like private sessions and stuff here and there. But I found this, went to another gym in Atlanta, and it was actually more of like kind of like a CrossFit combination where it had some other stuff. And I saw this older, Mexican dude in the corner just working the heavy bag. And I'm like, oh, I'll go train with this guy because I like martial arts and they don't really have a martial arts thing here. And I walked up and was like, hey, listen, if you ever want to like get some like work in together. And 2 years later, like from that day until 2 years after that point, he became like my Mr. Miyagi. And it was like the coolest thing in the world. He trained with Richard Bustillo, who was like Bruce Lee's right hand. So I was kind of like second generation from Bruce Lee in a way, or third. And then learning all the things he knew from outside. Like, so my thing that I was into is Muay Thai kickboxing, but he knew everything else too. So he was teaching me different things. And it was really beautiful. And what I can say in that experience, what you've experienced yourself, is the importance of a coach, the importance of a mentor. So, and this is how I'm a mentor and a coach now, because I'm still a student, and like what I learn, I can turn around and teach it through experience or through my learnings to people. And it's all about having somebody who can teach you how to fuck up less, can teach you how to be successful quicker. And they know the nuances like in between. And so you mentioned 3 different coaches for you. You mentioned martial arts, you mentioned business and personal. What are you getting? I know martial arts is pretty specific, but what are you getting from the personal coach? Like, what are they giving you? Like mindset stuff? Are they giving you motivation? Like, what do they give you that you may not necessarily get from the other 2 coaches?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Obviously, jiu-jitsu, he's teaching me how to break arms left versus right. Business coach is really drilling into my numbers every week and the accountability pieces of running a business, and then how do we provide a better experience to our clients on the mortgage side and our coaching clients on the coaching side. And then the personal coach, I got to give a shout out to John Vroman at Front Row Dads. John Vroman's a buddy of mine. He would be very aligned with you as well, Jesse. And he had this very, very successful speaking career. I'm talking about like high 5 figures, almost 3 figures to show up and give a speech. And he was voted like, best motivational speaker on the college circuit a couple of years in a row. And, when people would ask him like, oh, what's most important to you? He'd be like, oh, my wife, my kids, my family. And one day he just looked at his calendar and he was like, oh yeah, my calendar is not in alignment with what I say is important to me. So overnight, quit everything, took a huge risk, started a podcast called Front Row Dads. And the mission of Front Row Dads is fathers who are business owners, not business owners who happen to be fathers.
Yep.
And so I consider John in that community, because he really has built a community more than he's built a coaching program, kind of like my personal mentors. When it's time for a reality check of like, hey, you say your wife is really important, but there's nothing on the calendar for her over the last 2 weeks. When's the last time you did date night? When's the last time you sent flowers just because she's awesome? Like, when's the last time you honored the people that are most important in your life? And then similarly, it's really easy to throw yourself into work 70 hours a week, but if you have a heart attack by the time you're 55, like, what's the use, right? And so when I say personal coaching, it's really this idea of this community that's helping us stay centered in, family, friends, physical fitness, and really honoring those things in our daily life and our calendar that we say are the most important. But a lot of times, playing on the phone, working 10-hour days takes over that stuff that we say is actually the most important in our life. So that's kind of where that Front Row Dads community has helped us crush it on a personal level. And frankly, I mean, between the couple hundred guys that are in that group, there's probably 50 of us that would be divorced if we didn't have that mentorship of like, hey, you can say no to business and yes to your family a little bit more often than you think, and business will still be there.
So important. It's everything, man. Especially if you're going to be an entrepreneur. Instead of owning a job, you can really own your future and own your dreams. And people a lot of times when they get into business for themselves, they get hunkered down. Like if you've read the book E-Myth before, they get really stuck in the weeds of their business and managing the business, that they don't really give themselves the opportunity with all the benefits that come with entrepreneurship, some of the freedom, some of the, the perks of, creating your schedule as long as it's in alignment with the business, just with whatever your personal goals are. I feel like, especially in my business as a wealth manager, I've met so many people that would trade everything they have for their health, right? It's like that old adage. It's like a healthy guy or girl has like 1,000 wishes a day. A sick person has one, and it's just to be healthy, right? And most people, when they look at starting a business, they look at the glitz and the glamour, like, oh, I'm going to go make $1 million a year, and I'm going to go travel the world, and I'm going to go speak, and I'm going to do all these things. But a lot of times, number one, 99% of the time, it doesn't work like that. You have to build up to that. The overnight success is like 10, 15, 20 years. And then the other piece to that is you lose your fundamentals of what got you there in the first place a lot of times. So whether that's family, spirituality, health, and wellness, those are the things that like are most important. It's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I have this little, everybody's seen it before if they've been to any personal development, like the wheel of life or the flat tire or whatever. We kind of fill out the pie chart of like how things are going in your life, rate it 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. Like, how's your money? How's your spirituality? How's your family here? And what I have found is that when somebody's business is off kilter, almost always, the other piece of the pie that is ranked the lowest is physical health.
Yep.
And it's such a precursor to how much energy you have to put into your business and your family. And, I know myself, I've got 1, 2, 3, I got 3 scars on my knuckles. And that's not from boxing or fighting. That's from being an idiot in my 20s and being so worked up over something business. I punched a wall and left a scar on one of my hands. And it's like, when you're working out and you're in a good headspace and you get kind of that, especially if you're a guy, you get that aggressive, crazy testosterone energy out on a punching bag or, choking some guy out on the mat, which always sounds awkwardly like homoerotic. When you get that out, it's like everything else, the conversations with my kid, any frustration my wife and I might have with each other, frustrations in business, it just goes down like 4 notches when your physical self is in line. But, when you're fueled up on caffeine or alcohol or drugs, like a lot of people do in my industry, or you're morbidly obese, like every little thing is going to get to you in a way that it just really doesn't need to.
Well, there's 2 thoughts there that I think that you're touching on. And the first one is just our bodies are vessels, and they're definitely, energy is meant to pass through us. If we keep stored up energy, it can lead to disease. It can lead to, the body keeps the score kind of deal, where like you can get injured and all these different things, especially doing martial arts. If you're not doing self-care and if you're not getting that energy out of you, like it can cause a lot of issues. And then as far as just kind of moving with, having the ability as an entrepreneur to have energy, to be able to get after it. I mean, I don't think you can be a high level entrepreneur without being in some sort of health and wellness, like fitness. Like you cannot be the best entrepreneur that you can be without being healthy. It just doesn't go, like, it doesn't make sense to me. And so I really value personally, I'm into like biohacking and all these different things, but I feel like the best entrepreneurs are the ones that really take care of their bodies and their minds. No question.
Dude, funny story. It's weird that we keep coming back to martial arts, but I was on the mat with this guy and I knew he was older than me, maybe 10, 12 years older than me. So I'm 42. I was like, oh, this guy's got a lot of gray hair. He's got kind of the Marlboro Man mustache. He's probably in his 50s. And I knew he worked in the entertainment industry and he kind of had this like cowboy lifestyle in his early years. And he's just one of those guys who's got like old man strength where he's like kind of skinny and bony, but when he latches onto you, it's like, Jesus, dude, it's like the Terminator or something. And so we were going at it pretty hard. And when the class ended, my coach came over to me. He's like, hey man, you got to be careful with, so-and-so. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, what do you mean? I got to be careful with him. That guy's stronger than I am. And he's like, yeah, but his skin's kind of frail and whatnot. And like he rips his skin really easily when you're rolling. And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah. I mean, he's like, what's his name? 72. And I'm like, 72? And he's like, yeah. And he's really strong. He's still getting after it. And, maybe I would outlast him on cardio, but he is awkwardly strong. So then I follow him outside to be like, hey man, sorry we were going so strong. And not surprisingly, he was getting into a $100,000 BMW, which I later found out he bought all cash. And then not surprisingly, he owns 2 or 3 other businesses. Wow. So it's like you meet this guy who looks about 15 years younger than he is, and he's wildly successful. It's not a coincidence that that guy's still showing up for jiu-jitsu, going hard as a purple belt at 72 years old. Like these things are all related. And
it all plays together. Think about, you reminded me of Maynard James Keenan from Tool, which is one of my favorite bands, but he's been doing jiu-jitsu for so many years and he's got, 3 bands. He's got a restaurant, a winery, like he's got all these things. And it's like, it's all predicated, no question. Obviously so many things matter, but having great health and wellness absolutely can optimize that adventure for you.
Oh, we must be the same age. Are you around 40?
39. Yeah.
39. Okay. Yeah. So if Tool's your favorite band, I knew we were kindred spirits as soon as we got on. I love Tool. I went and saw Rage Against the Machine in 95, I think, when Evil Empire came out. I was in high school. So we go to the release of the Evil Empire album. Rage Against the Machine's killing it. Maynard came out and sang with them for like 3 songs. He did some cool songs. And I didn't know this until then because I had never seen him live. Did you know Maynard has like insane fear of performing in public?
Yeah. So he's really big into, he's never really center stage and he's always in costume. He's always in body paint. Like he's always in the very back where you can't see him. He actually doesn't like being a front man, but he's so gifted as a front man. It's like his calling, he has to do it, but he's absolutely terrified of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, talk about just like anybody who has any issue or concern or has any like limiting belief. Maynard used to be so scared of performing in front of an audience, he would sing behind the drummer. Like imagine going to a concert and the lead singer is behind the drummer just rocking out singing. It's like if that guy could get over this absurd fear of performing in public, and he's the front man for probably one of the best rock bands to come out of the 90s. Nobody else has any excuse.
No question. And not even like, and this isn't just as a fan, like this is just the truth. One of the best rock bands ever, one of the best lead singers ever. And this is someone who does this for a living in 3 bands. He's got 3 bands. And it's, if he can do that, it's just a testament to like what we can do. And going back to Tool real quick, the name of my wealth management firm is 46 and 2 Wealth Partners.
That's awesome.
Yeah, dude, for so many reasons, like because the meaning of that song has 3 layers to it, but yeah, so anyways, just going back to that. So I want to touch real quick on coaching and mentorship because I believe in this very, very heavily. And I know that a lot of my listeners that are, entrepreneurs and executives, they have coaches, mentors, are seeking them out. For you, have you had a time in your life, and I'll even, myself, I've had a roller coaster of an entrepreneur journey. And it's like, and not even in like a huge, negative or hugely great way, but just sometimes the days can kind of feel lonely, right? Like sometimes, even if you're in a people-based business like I am, whether it's podcasting, whether it's the financial planning business or the retreat business, I'm always around people, but then there's times where I'm not. And there's times where it can get kind of quiet and get kind of lonely and you're kind of like left to your own, thoughts and devices. Are there times in your entrepreneurial journey or in life where you've like lost that spark of joy or happiness? And is there a mentor or is there a coach that's kind of helped you regain that for yourself? And what did that look like?
Yeah, that's a really great question because especially going on, 21 years of mortgages, if I never have to look at a corporate tax return again, that will be too soon. Because, if I have to go through the minutia of like putting an application to the system, calculating the debt to income ratio, explaining to a client for the 57th, 100th time why the credit score we pull for your mortgage is different than the credit score you see online. That stuff just makes me want to take this pen and shove it through my left orbital, because the mortgage industry doesn't change. Finance doesn't change that much. Like the math of getting a mortgage has not changed in 40 years. So yeah, there are definitely days, weeks, months, seasons of my career where I've gotten really frustrated. And what coaching has helped us do is expand the business and expand revenue to a point where I can now pay for people to do those things that I dislike doing.
Yes.
What I really enjoy doing, I still like calling the realtors and kind of the business to business sales, right? I like figuring out how to build a better mousetrap and generate more leads and create a better customer service experience and update our realtors on what's going on. Like that's the stuff that gets me out of bed in the morning. That and the paycheck's not so bad. But the minutia of like, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Client, let's talk again about what happens if the appraisal comes in below the contract value. I finally figured out that these are the things I need to be hiring for and handing off. And if I'm being honest, I did it about 5 years too late. So if I go back in time 3 years, so let's call it, 2016 through 2019, I just wasn't the best version of myself, and our business wasn't giving the best product and service to the clients because I was trying to do all the stuff that I hated doing.
Yeah.
And then it was about 3 or 4 years ago, I partnered up with somebody, brought in somebody else. We just started adding pieces where it's like, hey, let's find somebody who's better at that than I am and is more motivated to do that than I am. And, had I done that 3 or 4 years earlier, I probably wouldn't have lost some key relationships, because there's a couple of realtors out there. I doubt they'll ever see this, but there's definitely some realtors out there that hate me, because we had some bad experiences or we had some falling outs on transactions where, the deal got done, but it was painful. And some of that might've been beyond my control. Some of that was maybe my fault. But it's interesting. A lesson that I wish I would have learned sooner is hire ahead of demand and hire as early as you can possibly afford to, in order to get the stuff off your plate that you don't like doing. Because then, now on a daily basis, I just stick in my zone of genius. It's like, as soon as we're recording this on a Monday, as soon as I get off my call, off this call, I'm just going into like making 50 business to business realtor calls. I got my little tracker here, and it's like, I'm looking forward to that. Whereas pulling credit reports and talking about appraisals, I don't look forward to that anymore. So yeah, that's really where a coach has helped me get in my zone of genius, stay there as high of a percentage of time as possible. And then, just figure it out from there. Because doing the drudgery of any job for more than 20 years, it just gets miserable.
Yeah, hiring to your weaknesses, your dislikes, like things that you just hate doing that are painstaking, that make you want to put that pen in your eye. Like that's something that you could find somebody else to do. And a lot of times those are the things you want to be lit up by what you're doing, and you want to be motivated by what you're doing. And there's times where you need, obviously discipline supersedes motivation, but it's nice to, like you said, look forward to making 50 phone calls. And so let's dive into that a little bit. Obviously a big narrative of your story and your journey has been lead generation. You have a book centered around it. What is it about lead generation that you saw early on? I think you illustrated this where you had like 2 closings or 2 sales in a month. You needed to go out and just hustle. What was that journey like for you? And what did you find actually worked for you once you hit your groove?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never been the type of person that has 6-pack abs, but I'm guessing if you're the type of person that has 6-pack abs, you probably just don't eat one meal of chicken and rice, go to the gym, do 200 sit-ups, and you're like, all right, sweet, I'm done, I'm good, I got 6-pack abs, right? If it was easy, everybody would do it. And ironically, in my personal life, I've never had that discipline because I like pizza a little bit too much. I don't like that. I don't like doing the core workout after jiu-jitsu. But much like that, or brushing our teeth, or telling your wife you love her, like lead generation has to become entrenched in yourself and in your organization as a daily habit.
Yep.
And something as easy as like, when you get to the point where you need to leverage your lead generation, just getting my support staff to say, hey, look, at the end of every call, Jesse, I just need you to remind the client, hey, is there anybody else who's looking to buy, sell, or refinance a home who Scott should talk to? I mean, that little sentence is 8 seconds or something. And just getting people into the rhythm of like, lead generation is a daily habit. Lead generation is a daily habit. And so, for our coaching clients, we try to make 10 proactive relationship building calls a day, right? So if I'm calling a realtor I do work with, or I want to work with, or I could work with, or is the listing side of a deal, if I'm calling 10 realtors a day to try to build or expand that relationship, everything else kind of takes care of itself. The other measurables, how many leads did we get? How many credits did we pull? How many deals are we closing? It all takes care of itself if we make the calls. And what I would say to your entrepreneurs and your business owners in the mortgage industry, you can tell the difference between the companies that are like trying to survive and the companies that are thriving. The companies that are trying to survive, they're measuring, the trailing indicator. How many deals did we close? How many widgets did we sell? How much profit did we make? Well, that's a lagging indicator that happens way after the day-to-day is done. What I'm constantly trying to do with myself, with my coaching clients, with the realtors who will listen to me is like, hey, focus on the leading indicators. Focus on the things you can do now, which is, all right, did we make 10 active, proactive calls a day for relationship building? Did we talk to 20 past clients? Did we send out, whatever the metric is for your business, 4 unsolicited emails, 4,000 unsolicited emails, 2,000 solicited emails, whatever it is, whatever the relationship building and lead generation driver is in your business, you've got to be doing it, right? And I always think, I coached this one restaurant owner one time, and he was always focused on like receipts, like how many sales did we make in a day? And I'm like, hey, I think his name was Bob. This was like 5 years ago. He found my book and he wanted a couple of calls, and I was interested in restaurants, so I did it. I was like, hey, Bob, like, I get it. The receipts are important. Like, the profit you make is important, but are you even measuring how you're getting those people in the door? Where are they coming from? Are they walk-ins? Are you sending out mailers? Do you have a big social media presence? And when we started diving into that, I ended up, restaurants are so easy to solve. It's a bad business to coach because you can solve their problems in like 3 calls and you never have to hear from them again. And for him, it was just like, I need to Google Places. I need to work on my Yelp review spot because people were finding him online. So I'm like, hey, if people are finding you online, you just got to get more people to find you online. And then the receipts will take care of themselves.
Yep.
But I think a lot of businesses get in the habit of measuring the lagging indicators instead of the leading indicators. And the number one leading indicator is how much lead generation is your business doing?
Yep, no question. It's important to look at it that way too, because what can you control every day, right? And I started my career in sales years ago, and it was very rudimentary. It was door to door, outside sales, cold call, commission, but it was fun. I was excited, and had a management training program where you could become an owner one day, and I did, and it was amazing. But the things you could control were basic things like your attitude. Have a great attitude all day long. And people might look at that like, well, why is that important? Well, it's important when you're getting your teeth kicked in, because a lot of times you do get your teeth kicked in, especially when you're outside sales, door-to-door commission. People are like, get the hell out of here, no soliciting. You have to have a great attitude for 8 hours, and that's easier said than done. So starting off with that, and then working your law of averages. How many doors do I need to see to find like 10 sales? I need 100 people. I can find 10 sales, and working that every single day. And then there was all these other steps to success is what they called them, and factors of impulse and all this kind of like Zig Ziglar type stuff. But it really is true. It's having a process, having a plan, sticking to it, and then working the things that are going to be those leading indicators. It's funny because in my world, in your world as well, like having economic indicators, having leading, lagging, all these different things, like you have to know your numbers, and you have to know what's going to be successful for you so that you can go where you want to go.
Yeah. I imagine in your job, you get this all, oh, should I buy Tesla? Should I buy this? Should I do this? Should I do this individual stock? You're like, well, the first thing you should probably do is just save some money, because unless you have a pool of money to invest, all the other shit doesn't really matter, right?
Question.
So it's like the leading indicator is save some money. Then you can decide, is it gold? Is it commodities? Is it Tesla? Is it futures? Like, who cares? But until you save a pool of money, or you start systematically saving, it's kind of worthless, right? Same thing here. Like, until you start systematically making the calls, I can't diagnose like, oh, is your conversion strategy wrong? Or are you not connecting? Or are you not asking good questions? People always call me and they're like, well, Scott, what's the script? What's the script? And I'm like, there is no script, asshole. Just make the phone calls, be a human being, try to relate to other people, try to be a good person. And the script will kind of present itself, because especially post-COVID, people want real, genuine, connection. Yeah. They don't want to get a cold call from a mortgage salesman when maybe their grandmother's in the hospital dying of COVID, right? But if somebody calls and says, hey man, how's it going? Like, how's the family doing? Like, if we get stuck, because I'm in the communist state of California, if we get stuck in lockdown for 4 more years, like how are you going to generate business? Like, what's your plan?
Yeah.
What are you looking most forward to once we come out of COVID? And you just act like a human being, and somehow people react.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit. I know it's interesting in your industry because I have some people. One that's a good buddy of mine. He's a client as well, my wealth management firm, but he's in the mortgage industry, lending, and he's crushing it. He's been crushing it all during COVID, and it's like there's so many industries that have been hard hit, and then there's other industries that haven't been hard hit. What's the experience been like for you? Have you had to make any pivots, and like what have you learned during COVID for your business?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I almost feel guilty saying this, but the mortgage industry is one of maybe 3 or 4% of the industries in America nationwide that has actually really thrived throughout of all of COVID. One, because well, in Southern California, we had kind of already self-selected into the bucket of people who could be homeowners,
Yeah.
who were also working professionals, white collar workers. Their income wasn't as disrupted because of the fact that they can do their business on Zoom, like we're doing this interview. In Los Angeles, no offense, but if your wife's a waitress at BJ's and your husband's like, middle management at the local store that got shut down, you probably already weren't in the box of people that could afford a house in LA, because our housing prices out of here are out of control.
Yeah.
Thanks to our horrible zoning laws, but that's a whole different political conversation. However, so that was good for us because most of the people that could afford to buy could still refinance or afford to buy. And then because of COVID, rates plummeted. So, again, I almost feel guilty saying this. I had my most successful year ever in 2020 by any metrics, income earned, number of loans funded, like we had our best year ever. And so what was interesting is trying to stay humble at a time when I had friends and family and some clients who were really suffering, whether they were suffering because they had a loss in the family or a sickness or, financial disruption. So just staying humble and kind of staying quiet, but then also working our ass off. We hired 2 new people in 2020 in order to help with the volume. And that was the pivot for success. What's interesting now is as things are slowing down, rates are starting to tick up. There's still a massive, massive inventory shortage of houses across the US, especially in major metropolitan areas like Atlanta, like Miami, like Los Angeles, well, maybe not so much San Francisco. A lot of people moving out of San Francisco, yeah. But there's a huge housing crisis. So now the pivot is I've brought these people on. They're 100% dependent on my lead generation skills to continue to bring in enough business to pay their paycheck. Now that things are getting a little harder and there's not just money falling from the trees in the form of easy refinances, how do we pivot our business to keep production up so I can keep everybody employed and, kind of in the lifestyle that they've become accustomed to? So, it's constantly dealing with the market cycles. Like I'm preaching to the choir here, since you work in finance, things go up, things go down, people get stressed, people get exuberant. It's just all part of the normal business cycle.
What are some of the things you're adjusting with? Because that's a really good topic of conversation in terms of, right now, the good news for an economic indicator is we're still seeing businesses being built, homes are being built, but we are still at a point where there's more buyers than there are, sellers right now. There's a lot of people that want to buy a home right now, especially in Atlanta, right? And Georgia in particular. The inventory is really low. From what I can tell, the market's slightly overpriced, which is okay. It's just how the market's dictating right now. But overall, what are some ways that you're able to kind of pivot your business to be able to keep those mouths fed, so to speak?
Yeah, it's interesting. It comes down to a lot of education. And I think one of the most difficult concepts to explain to a consumer is the idea of inflation, right? Because all they're seeing is, oh my God, this house that was $700,000 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 6 months ago is now $900,000. And I'm like, yes, that's correct. And it might very well feel like houses are expensive or overpriced or overvalued. I hate the word bubble because I don't think we're in a bubble. So it's really like pulling them back and saying, all right, let's look at some other things. Interest rates still historically low, not the all-time low that they were November of last year, but still very low. Borrowing money for 30 years at a fixed rate interest in the low threes is like historically unheard of. So, yeah. All right, so rates are low, so the affordability there is low. The next thing is, I know it's really scary that prices of houses, especially here in Southern California, are 700, 800, 900, 1.5 million. And if you could go back in time and tell your parents that you were going to make $250,000 as a graphic designer for Netflix and say that you were broke, you'd probably kick your own ass, or your parents would kick your ass, right? Because prices of income and real income, despite what we see on the news, real wages have grown. Now, of course, there's a huge cross section of people who got screwed in COVID because the government told them they couldn't work. But if we take out those people that are unemployed due to government circumstances, real wages are up. So it's like interest rates are still low, wages are relatively high, especially in that kind of working middle class kind of professional services industry. And then, that means properties are going to be more expensive because there's fewer of them. Cost of lumber is up. So trying to explain to people like, hey man, let's just take a step back. If I would have told you were in high school, or sometimes I'll have people tell me, this is a good one. I think I can say this without violating any fiduciary responsibility. I was doing a loan for a corporate attorney that worked for one of the big tech companies. And she goes, as we're having our conversation, I'm taking the application and I asked her about her income. She was like, yeah, she's like, it's crazy, man. Like my old job, I used to make $275, and this tech company I get that I work for, they get every single dollar of income out of my work ethic, but they're paying me $600. And I'm like, oh, you make $600,000 a year? She's like, yeah. So that to her seemed normal, that she went from $275 in income to $600, but she couldn't wrap her head around the fact that the house was now 1.5 instead of 1.3.
Yeah.
And so just some subtle education of like, hey, you 125% X'd your income. Of course, property values are going to be 20% more expensive because there's a lot of you trying to buy that house. And so just really getting in touch with like explaining inflation, being an advisor. And the challenge with doing that, and this is kind of the frustration with my industry, you financial people figured it out because you guys stopped advertising rates of return about 10 years ago. And that was very smart. But the mortgage industry, all we advertise is rate. So, that person that calls me that needs the education, that needs some explanatory like education on inflation and what the market's doing and why they're probably still buying at a good time. The only question they have is, well, Scott, on the internet, they can get me 2.75 and you're at 2.875. And I'm like, all right, cool. Go with the guy that works in the call center who was at McDonald's 3 months ago. Like if that's what you're looking for, I really can't compete with that. And so, yeah, I think standing out in the education, a lot more conversations per closed deal, like a lot. That's another reason we had to grow the team, is because I was just out of time. I'd make my 50 realtor calls, look down at my phone, and I've got 17 text messages from clients that need explanations on stuff going on with the deal. So I think that's just the new market. Like you can either be the low cost leader, automated, Mr. Mrs. Client, figure it out yourself, or you could be a professional. And when you do that, you're going to have a lot more conversations per deal.
For sure. Yeah. It's all about how you can make money, but how you make your money is even more important. Right. So looking forward to the rest of 2021, we're a little more than halfway through this crazy year, crazy 13, 14 months. What do you got going on that you're excited about, either business or personally or professionally for the rest of the year?
Yeah, I thrive on live events. Like I'm an in-person type of person, whether I'm at live events, taking notes, meeting the people next to me, connecting with realtors, connecting with other business owners. I love that stuff. And then I love, even though it's a lot of energy, a couple times a year, getting up on stage and teaching. And it's not even really teaching or coaching anymore. It's really now about facilitation. Like, how do we bring the best out of the group? How do we set up these little pods of people that are talking and sharing knowledge with each other? So I'm really looking forward to getting back to that. Also looking forward to seeing Governor Newsom hopefully impeached and recalled, and see what direction the state of California can go for the future. Because there's so much good stuff in California. We just keep voting for the wrong policies.
No, I know. I listen to Rogan as much as I do. I've heard over the last few months like how bad California is with Garcetti and Newsom just driving it into the ground, just completely like making it awful for people. There's a mass exodus, as you know, of people, a lot of people that are leaving to go to like Texas or up, further up the coast. And for those that are holdouts like yourself, I'm sure that a better day will come. But man, I appreciate who you are. I'm thankful for all that you've shared with us on this conversation. I know that a lot of people are going to find some value and some insights. We'll make sure people are pointed to you that have questions. But he's the amazing, the mighty, the powerful Scott Groves. I'm Jesse T. Be sure to catch us on next week's episode of The Jesse T Show.